Everybody, welcome to today's video, and today we're going to take the E60 M5 and prepare it for a 2,000 mile trip to Southern California. So let's get to it. Firstly, prepping for a long distance drive of 2,000 miles or more with an M5 has some specific things that you want to make sure you cover. And some of that is mechanical, some of it's cosmetic, some of it is just making room for your luggage. So let's get started on the exterior of the car. Some things you want to prepare prior to taking your trip 2,000, 3,000 miles, maybe across the country. You want to do certain things to make sure you're ready for a trip and that the car can tolerate that trip. Number one, safety. So we have wheels, we have tires, 4 tires on this car. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you have 4 good tires. They're not leaking air, they're not damaged, they don't have bad wear on them, that they're in good shape. You want good tires that are holding air, that are going to get you there and back safely. After all, like the term, the only thing between you and the road is the rubber, and you want to make sure you have good tires. So, on the tires, what we have here on this BMW, and as much as I've spoken in other videos, guys, about run flat tires. Run flats are love and hate things. Now, a lot of people hate the run flat tires. So when preparing for a 2,000 mile trip, you want to make sure that you have a spare tire in the trunk with a mag lock. Don't forget your special locking key for that actual rim lock, so that if you have a roadside issue, that you're able to take the wheel off and that you have a spare that has air in it, that it's ready to go. I'm not going to show you that here because this car has the run flats and there are no provisions in the back for this. We have run flat tires all the way around. The beauty about run flat tires, if you're going a long distance trip like this, is that it technically can be run for 80 up to, they say 80 kilometers per hour for a pretty substantial period of time. Now they say 80 kilometers at 80 kilometers per hour. The reality is, if you're away from a city, if it means getting you to a town, that's the difference between having to do a tire change in the middle of a busy highway or freeway, or just riding it through and driving more cautiously to get you to the major center to get your tires changed. So either way, make sure you either have a working spare if you have non-run flat tires, and or if you do have run flat tires, just make sure they're in good shape and that you have no issues, nails, screws in them and that whatnot. So moving along, of course, looking at the exterior of the car, I always like to do a wax job. So I always do a bit of a wax. You know, when you get bugs and all kinds of whatnot, you don't know what kind of weather you're going to experience along the way. That's a long ways to drive. You want to make sure that you do a good wax on the car, that you're going to have good, you know, a good protective barrier from anything that basically gets in your way, like bugs and such. Now that being said, here's another touch, and I'll just show you right here. Right here we have paint protection film. As you can see on this part of the car, up here we have no film, down here we do. Now on that film topic, so regarding the protective film, I would say if you're going a long ways like that, there's a high probability you're going to be experiencing a lot of rocks and a lot of bugs along the way. And when you have protective film like this protects you from rocks sprayed off of semi-trucks, and it protects you from bugs, of course. Makes it a lot easier to get the bugs off, and certainly the rocks won't take a toll on the hood. I've seen that. I've had a lot of bad experience with rocks on long trips, and there's no getting around it. What if you get stuck on a bad road, gravel road, or a construction zone, and you wind up with tar, rocks coming off of other vehicles? That winds up on yours. So protect the paint with either wax and or paint protection film, which I would highly recommend if you're doing a long trip. So we talked about the exterior, the tires. Next is the brakes, and I'm not going to really show you that. Recently, you saw in a previous video of mine, I had the service light for a brake fluid flush. And so I would say before you take a drive to the mountains, because I'm actually taking a drive to the, like I said, to California, and when you do that, there's a lot of hilly areas, there's mountainous drives, there's a lot of flats of course too, but you can expect that your car is going to get a lot of good hard use up and down the hills. You want to make sure you have good brakes, and so prior to the trip you want to make sure you do a brake flush. No different than when you take your car on a racetrack. You want to get your brakes flushed and make sure you have enough wear lining on your brakes, on your pads and your rotors, that will sustain that trip. And you gotta remember where you're driving. If you're doing a lot of mountain driving, you're going to be ups and downs, and you're going to do a lot of hard braking at times. Be prepared. Moving right along, the other thing you want to make sure You've got good glass so you can see out your window. Of course here, wiper blades, I just changed these. I've got brand new wiper blades. You'll notice it's the upgraded style with the constant pressure spring. You want a good wiper like this. Good high quality wiper blades, going to protect you in bad rainy conditions. I took a trip a couple years ago to California and I saw a flash flood actually en route. I was down in St. George, Utah, and I came across an immense flood. The kind of rain that came down so hard, the wipers at full speed couldn't keep up. So you want to make sure you maximize your wiping, your windshield wiping capability. Make sure you put new wiper blades like I just put on a constant spring form here. Utilize that, make sure you got good wiper blades. Again, moving along, we go to the back of the car. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you have all your junk out of the trunk. So you want to clear all the crap out because you're going to have luggage. You want to make sure you get all the junk out of the trunk that you don't need. There, now you got all your junk out of the trunk, you're ready to put your luggage in there, and we're ready to go for a big long trip of 2,000 miles. Okay, come on in here. Now we're gonna show you what you gotta make sure that you have in place here. Now, obviously, you lift up the hatch here, and here we have the battery, no science there. Just make sure that all your warranty issues and your recalls are taken care of. There's an issue with the ground cable on one of the BMW recalls, factory recalls. There's issues, a lot of electrical related issues with some of the BMWs starting fire. Sometimes it just does impact the way a vehicle will run. Make sure everything looks hunky-dory in here, that you've got a healthy battery. At the end of the day, if the battery's healthy and it starts well, when you leave, you're probably in good shape, but just make sure you have a healthy battery that's good for a long trip. The other thing, of course, here, what do we have here? We have a way to inflate a tire that might go bad. Even though we have run flat tires, we have another means to potentially air it up. If there's an issue, for some reason we have drawn a bit of a leak and we have a tire that's just not holding air and you're stuck somewhere and you've got that, you know, that low pressure situation going on, it doesn't hurt to keep pumping it back up every once in a while. You have a means to do that. Make sure all your original equipment is on board here, so you're ready to go with that. Other thing, we have water here. Never hurts to have water on board. What if you get stranded somewhere? You want to make sure you have a good supply of some high energy, high protein snacks and meals. Never hurts to put that in the trunk. No harm, no foul if you don't use it, but always have water, lots of water, and have a survival kit, as well as a roadside kit. For me, as well, I haven't shown it here, I would highly recommend you bring a basic assortment of hand tools that you can do some basic jobs on this car. Doesn't mean you're going to do a major repair or tear down on the side of the road. Just, it never hurts to have some hand tools to help you through it. These hand tools up here usually don't give you much. This up here in the BMW tickle trunk doesn't really give you much. There's a few basics. You got a tow hook and a screwdriver and a few odds and sods. This, of course, if you have an issue with the sunroof, this is a way to manually shut that. So make sure all those tools are there because they're all there for a reason. Another thing, we all know that BMW M5s use oil. They drink it like a Slurpee. They are hard on oil, and I would highly recommend you always carry at least 1 to 2 of these quarts with you every trip, because I guarantee you a trip as I'm going to take to California, I will be using probably a couple of these quarts. I would expect 2 to 3 possibly by the time I'm there. So I would say always have a spare quart of oil or 2 if you're going to do a big trip like this. Because why? Specifically, you don't want to add jobber oil to these cars. The E60 M5 with that F1 derived motor, it needs the good juice. And this one here at 1060 currently is the BMW choice. You might as well not deviate and go with what the BMW vendors tell you. So make sure you've got extra oil. So let's close this up. The next thing we're going to talk about are some of the basic mechanical checks outside of, you know, the normal stuff that you're going to make sure that you have serviced in the shop. We're going to talk about the quick stuff. So, firstly, you want to make sure, of course, that, pop the hood, that you have a quick look under the hood. Make sure that you have no leaks. So have a look down in here. Of course, I mean, there's only so much you can see from the top naturally. Oil on the bottom is going to tell you something, but look down here. Make sure you have no leaks coming out of the top anywhere. And as far as you can tell, look down the bottom, you know, the orifices down every little space here, and make sure that you don't have no obvious leaks. So looking under the hood, we want to check a bunch of different things. So first of all, you want to check your brake fluid. Well, brake fluid reservoir actually happens to be underneath this driver's side. This is the pollen filter or your microfilter. So it's actually under this housing for the brake fluid reservoir. So you want to make sure your brake fluid is topped up. What you also want to make sure is your windshield washer fluid is also topped up, because where I live in northern Canada, often you have grit and crap coming off the road, grit and other debris that comes off the road and often contaminates the windshield and the water. Even if it's raining, it's nice to have this to be able to wipe your windshield clean, of course. Also, make sure your antifreeze is topped up. You have a good level and it's the right mixture, right combination, and it's of the right rating and product. Make sure it's the correct color as well. You want to make sure that's all good to go. Of course, moving along, you also want to make sure that your power steering fluid is topped up. Everything is good to go there. You don't want to have an issue with, you know, transmission fluid, power steering fluid, any of your general fluids. You want to make sure they're good. And of course, we move over here and we look at some of the other things. We just want to do a general scan of the engine, make sure there's no oil. This one's a little bit dusty right now, but look down in between there. Make sure there's no oily residue anywhere down in there, because this is a place where you're going to find, if you look hard enough, you may find oil starting to seep from fittings and whatnot, and you don't want to have an issue of a leaky fitting that lets go on you while you're driving through the mountains. Now, of course, we have another situation. We have your high pressure line here for your air conditioning, and as well you have your low pressure line for your air conditioning, and you want to make sure that those things are actually intact, but more importantly that you're blowing cold air. You may want to do a recharge before you go on a long trip to some hot climate like, you know, Death Valley, California. You want to make sure you have good air conditioning, because that could be the difference between life and death, believe it or not. So you want to make sure all those things are checked. Again, here's engine oil. That's one that you can easily check, but that's going to be done through your electronic dipstick. You can't do it here. There is no dipstick here, as I've shown you in other videos, but there's, you know, sadly enough, no dipstick. Some people like it, some people hate it, but there it is. So this is going to be a regular outlet for you, because you will be adding oil. It is an E60 M5 with the S85 motor, so you will be adding oil. This is where you'll add that oil. So make sure you have a funnel in the back with your quarts of oil, and this will be where you take care of that. As well, moving along here, you want clean air when you're driving through the mountains and, you know, all the mountain passes. You're going to be using AC. You're going to be using you know, heat and cool and airflow in the car, because it's going to be stagnant likely. Make sure these are all upgraded. And of course, I did that. There's one on either side over there and right here too. What we have here is the cabin air filters. Very easy to change. Disconnect your two switch connections. I showed you previous. This pops off, and then one little bolt here that you can basically spin off and flip this up. That gets flipped, you change that filter on both sides, you're good to go. Moving to the inside of the car, one more quick thing I'll mention. So I treated all the leather interior here. Of course, you want to make sure you do that. Never hurts to treat the leather with a nice leather conditioner. That's going to last a long ways. These seats take a lot of beating and a lot of, you know, in and out, and you're moving around trying to get comfortable, and so often what happens is, you know, it's taking wear, it's taking a toll, and along trips you might be taking a lot of ins and outs, but this is going to take a bit of a toll here as far as wear and tear. Always does, but this is just as good time as any to apply some leather conditioner. As well, if you spill any drinks on there, that's going to be easier to wipe off and clean off, of course, too. Now, everything else you want to make sure is clean and ready to go for the trip. You've got room in the back, everything's cleaned up. Always seems that, you know, you always run out of space when you're on a long trip, so it never hurts to kind of leave that space open. Check your oil level. You got to hit the start button. Then you have to toggle the BC button here. You keep toggling until you hit your oil light or your oil level. So you got to make sure that you're always topped up. Of course, we're at 0.9 right now. We're checking on relatively level ground, although we're on a bit of a slope here. Always check this on level ground. The car has to be full operating temperature, and you have to have driven at least 10 miles. But basically, you toggle through it, and make sure you've got oil and it's topped up. You never want to get on a long trip and not have the oil level topped up for you. That is a recipe for disaster. The other thing, of course, exterior, you want to make sure all your lights are working. Because the police can give you a hard time if your lights aren't functioning properly. Okay, now everybody, prepping the car for a long trip with an M5 can actually be a relatively easy task. Just make sure you're well prepared. The fluids are checked, the tires are good, the brakes are solid, you have the room, everything's clean. Make sure all the lights are working, and you are ready to go. And I just wanted to share with you really quickly how simple it can be, but there's some critical checks and preparations that you need to take to make sure that you have a safe and reliable trip on your way to vacation. So everybody, thanks again. It's Mark here signing out with ExoticCar PlayPlace. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Love to see you on the next one. Don't forget to share or comment as well, share with your friends, and give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you on the next one. See you then. Bye-bye.